In today's tutorial, I'm going to be showing you how to make this needle felted toadstool. My name is Charlotte Allen and you've reached my channel, The Felting Alchemist. So today we're going to be doing this needle felted toadstool tutorial. So we're going to be adding colour layers to it, we're going to be adding its stalk, we're going to be adding the frilling underneath, we're going to be doing all sorts of colour layers to make it look super authentic and really magical and autumnal. So let's have a look at what you need for this tutorial. So the materials you're going to need to make your needle felted toadstool are as follows. You're going to need around about 3 grams of a mushroom coloured wool bat. So I've got a Corriedale here, but you can use any kind of wool that you want to, but you need around about 3 grams of this. You're also going to need about 2 grams of a mustard coloured wool bat. I wouldn't go for yellow because it's a bit too vibrant, so a nice muted mustard colour works really well. And then in addition to that, I've also got a nice bright orange colour as well. And this is going to be used for our layering of colours as we make our toadstool, and you want about 2 grams of this too. So you're also going to need some red wool bats as well. So all of the wools I've used so far apart from the Corriedale are merino wool bats. You want to go for a nice bright vibrant red if you can do, and obviously the amount of wool that you use is really dependent on the size of the mushroom that you're making. So if you're making a smaller mushroom, you're obviously going to need less wool, but if you're making one the size that I'm making, you're going to need around about 6 grams. And then finally you're going to need a white core wool. So I've got my Shetland white core wool here, and we're going to use this to make the core of our toadstool, but then we're also going to use it to make the dots later on. So ideally you want to go for quite a short fibred core wool so you don't end up with lots of long strands coming out of your toadstool when it's finished. Tools wise, you're going to need your fine twisted needles, ideally in a needle felted pen, so I've got 2 in here already. You're also going to need 2 medium twisted needles, or if you can get hold of some medium twisted cross star needles, because they're really quick felters. And again, I've just got 2 ready here in my needle felting pen. I've then got a single medium twisted cross star needle here, but you could also use a triangular needle if you prefer to, or you could even use a twisted medium needle. It doesn't really matter, whatever works for you. So just try them, test them out and see which ones you prefer. I've also got a wooden kebab stick here, and this is going to be for making the stalk of our mushroom. So you want it to be relatively thick, but not too thick. And it doesn't have to be anything fancy. I think I just stole this one from a barbecue that wasn't used. So don't worry, it hasn't had any meat attached to it at any point. But it doesn't have to be anything fancy at all. You could use metal if you wanted to, but I've just gone for wood because it's cheaper. And finally, you're going to need a polystyrene ball. Now, this polystyrene ball that I have here is 10 centimetres, but you could use smaller if you want to. You could go with an 8 centimetre or even a 4 centimetre. But just remember that the size of the ball that you use is then going to have an impact on the size of the toadstool that you create. So the ball that I'm using today is going to make us quite a large toadstool, but if you can't get your hands on a 10 centimetre, don't worry, just go with a smaller one and that'll be absolutely fine. The first thing we need to do is build up the cup of our mushroom. So I've got my ball here and I've got the round side upwards because this side's been a bit damaged. So I'm going to place it on my felting mat, and then I'm going to take some of my core wool and I'm going to place a few layers onto my needle felted ball. Okay, like so. I'm then going to take my medium twisted cross star needles and I'm just going to felt this wool into the top of my ball. Okay, and we're going to felt it round in a round shape. Okay, so we're creating a circular shape on the ball. So it's a bit like when you make a needle felted balloon like I showed you a few days ago, but the only difference is we'll be removing this from the top of our ball in a moment. One thing you need to bear in mind with this is you don't want to felt the wool too heavily into the polystyrene, because what happens is it really felts into it and then it makes it really difficult to remove later on. And because what we're doing here is creating the initial shape for our mushroom cup, but eventually we'll remove this and then we're going to add the layers of colour and the dots and everything else that you'd expect to see on a toadstool. So just don't go too crazy because it just makes life a lot more difficult to remove it later on. Okay. So I want to just get my initial shape right first of all. I know it might be a bit tricky to see with the white against the white, but hopefully you can see the difference between the two. Okay, so I've got that initial shape felted down. So what I want to do next is I want to add some height to the middle of this. So I'm going to take some more of my core wool. I'm going to take some smaller pieces. I'm just going to layer them on the top. I don't want to take this too far down the edges. I'm concentrating more on the center top part of our mushroom now, or toadstool. Keep fluctuating between the two. It's the same thing, I think, isn't it? Mushroom, toadstool, fungi. Hopefully this toadstool will be a fungi. Oh dear. It was only a matter of time before I cracked out the dad jokes, guys. So I'm just going to felt those rogue bits of wool just down into the sides, and then get a bit more height around that top part. I'm just going to make sure this comes off at the moment. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. We want to make this relatively compacted before we remove it, because it's going to make life a lot easier for ourselves when we come to take it off later and add the colour. If it's too loose like it is at the moment, it's just going to be a real nightmare to felt anything onto and keep that nice mushroom cup shape. So we really want to try and get a medium amount of density to this at the moment without felting it so much that it adheres to our polystyrene ball. So it is a fine balance. But if you just kind of keep loosening it, and the joy of having a ball is you can kind of move it around the ball as well. It shouldn't be a problem. Okay, so I'm going to add a bit more height. So I'm going to take a bit more of my wool and then just layer that on top again. Again, really focus on getting the height to the top of that mushroom. And it doesn't matter if it's not symmetrical, because these toadstools or fungi or whatever you want to call them, they never really are symmetrical. They tend to be a bit wonky. And I really think that's what gives them their lovely magical appearance. Because when you see a fairy toadstool, you don't want to see it looking perfectly round and symmetrical. You want to see it all knobbly and a bit kind of like wonky and perfectly imperfect is how I would describe it. So I'm just going to felt that down. And again, I'm just going to lift this off and make sure it comes off nice and easily. And I'll be back in a second once I've got the shape that we need. Okay, so I've added all the height to my toadstool cup now. So what I want to do is remove this from the ball, and it should quite easily, there we go, come away. And I haven't got any of the polystyrene attached inside. So it's really important to intermittently just sort of free it from the ball so it doesn't adhere itself to the ball. And that way you end up with a nice clean cone-like shape at the end of it. So now that we've taken this off of the ball, you can really see that we've got the beginnings of a lovely looking mushroom cup. So the next thing we want to do is start adding the colour. So I'm going to start off with the mustard yellow. So I'm going to get my yellow in. And we're just going to place a small amount of this around the edge of our mushroom cup. So I'm taking a strip and I'm just going to make it really fine. Oh, broke a bit too much off there. So we don't want anything too thick, like so. I'm just going to bring it onto the edge of our mushroom cup. I'm going to take my fine twisted needles and I'm just going to start felting that down so that we're covering probably about a couple of centimetres of the base of our mushroom, okay? And just use your felting mat now to give you a bit of support, because you'll find that these edges here are still quite loose. They're not really heavily felted at the moment. So we're going to build up on them now, but just be aware of that. And again, you just want to keep lifting your mushroom cup up so it doesn't adhere itself to your felting mat. And then I'm just going to bring any loose bits just round into the base of our mushroom. Okay, so I'm just going to take a little bit more just to cover that gap, and again felt it down. And just keep adding the yellow until your mushroom cup looks something like this. Okay, so we've added all of our mustard wool bats now down to the bottom edge of our mushroom. So the next thing we want to do is add our orange wool bats. So I'm going to grab some, and what we're going to do is we're going to add it, and we're going to add it so that we're going down vertically. We're not going to add it horizontally, because what we're going to do then is end up with this kind of strong edge, and we want to really, really blend it in nicely with the mustard colour. So we want to kind of make it quite opaque, so we're not kind of having a really thick piece of the wool bats going over our mustard, but just enough just to kind of encroach over the mustard and then go onto the white area. So I'm talking very quietly because it's 4 o'clock in the morning at the moment whilst I'm making this tutorial. Isn't there a song about that? I can't remember now. It's 4 o'clock in the morning and it looks like it's gonna be another sleepless night. Isn't that a Crystal Gale song? And I'm making a needle felted tutorial and I better not wake anybody up. So, would you believe I used to sing? Probably not from that example of my singing. Okay, so what we want to do is be really careful of our fingers, because obviously this is quite shallow. So as you stab, potentially you're going to go through to the other side. So be really cautious of your fingers whilst you're doing this. So the best way to do it is to hold it down onto the mat and then felt downwards with your needles. And don't worry if it looks a bit messy, because it's all about layering those colours up. So we've got a nice, authentic looking toadstool mushroom. I'm not quite sure what the difference is between a toadstool and a mushroom. Is it one because, well, they're all wild, aren't they? Is it one's edible and one's not? I don't really know. I suspect that's probably the case. Where I live, I never really see many of these sort of red cap mushrooms. We tend to get lots of the fungus that grows on trees, the really large fungus, but we never really seem to get anything in sort of the red ones with the white spots. That I think they're called like lady moth or something, I'm not sure. Don't worry too much if you go up quite high with the orange, because we're going to go over with the red later anyway, and I think that the orange just adds another level of depth and colour to our mushroom cup. So I'm going to keep felting this down, and I'll be back in a second once it's all felted into position. Right, so I've added the orange wool bats, and as you can see here, I've left about 1/2 centimetre of the mustard wool bats that we've already added, and then I've kind of blended the orange over the mustard. And then it's gone over down to the edge a little bit in areas, but I'm not too worried about that, because I just think it adds to the authenticity of our mushroom or our toadstool, or whatever we want to call it. So next we want to get our red wool bats. And we want to do the same thing that we did with the orange. We don't want to kind of just put it on in one block, because otherwise we're going to end up with that nasty looking fake ridge. We want to kind of add it in sections. So I'm just going to pull off sections of my red wool bats. It's a nice pillar box red. And then I'm just going to felt it down once again onto our mushroom cup. But this time I'm going to go onto the orange. I'm not really going to touch the mustard at all. So I'm going about 1/2 centimetre onto the orange, and then I'm kind of adding the bulk of it to the top of our cup. So we get a nice ombre look to it. And again, we're at a stage now where we can just kind of use our fine needles quite easily. What I would say is be quite cautious going all the way through, because what you don't want to do is have any red coming through onto the other side. I mean, it's not a big deal because we're going to put a different colour on this side eventually anyway, but I'd just be a bit cautious because it is quite a bright colour and it can be quite difficult to cover over. So just be cautious about that. Just lightly felt it in. So I'm just bouncing the needles very lightly, and I'm probably going in about that much. So I'm not going all the way through to the other side. Okay, I'm just going to take a bit more. I'm just getting the fibres to kind of go downwards, and because they're kind of almost a bit curly, it helps with the blending. And then building the red up at the top just adds to the bulk at the top of our cup as well. So you want to keep doing this until everything is really nicely integrated. and you haven't got any of these air pockets with the red wool as well. So everything's nicely felted down. So you've got a nice medium felt. You don't want it to be super duper firm, but you want it to be felted enough so you don't have any kind of, I don't know if you can see on camera, but too much fluff on the top. You want to have everything nice and neatly felted. And this also helps with the blending as well. The more you felt it down, the better the blend you get. And the fine needles just give us a nice smooth finish too. I'm just going to place another section about here. And I'll be back in a second once all the red's been added. So all the red's been added now, and as you can see here, we've got this kind of ombre effect. We've got the mustard, then we've got the orange, and now we've got the red colour. So the next thing we need to do is add our white spots. So I'm going to go to my wool bats. I've got my white Shetland wool bats here. Now the only difficulty with the wool I've chosen is that it's quite long fibred. So if you can, you really need to go for a short fibred white wool bat. So something like a Gotland would work really nicely with this. So I'm just going to pull off some sections. I mean, this is fine, but it's just a little bit long. So I'm going to pull off some sections and I'm just going to roll them between my thumb and my finger. And then I'm just going to add them with my medium needle. So I'm just holding it in place with my nail and then just felting it down lightly with my needle to create those white spots. And it's quite nice and easy now because you've got the kind of the structure of the mushroom cup in place, so you can just hold the mushroom cup down and just felt these into position. So I'm going to do another one. And make them different sizes as well and be quite sporadic. What I tend to do is have the majority of them kind of clustered towards the top of our mushroom and then have them kind of dispersing down the side of the mushroom. But I don't really have any large clusters. I'm just going to take my embroidery scissors and get rid of those long pieces a second. And then go for another one. So I'm just rolling between my thumb and my forefinger, creating that rough ball shape, placing it onto my mushroom cup, very lightly felting down first, because if you felt down too heavily initially, you'll end up with a wool kebab on your needle, which we don't want. So if you just felt it nice and lightly, you won't end up with that situation. So what I mean is, if you felt and you press too hard, oh, it's not worked on that occasion. I'll try again in a minute. We'll try with a smaller bit. So if you place it, say here, and I felt, and then you've ended up with it being skewered onto your needle, which is why you want to press quite lightly. And it tends to be, as you can see, occurring more with smaller amounts of wool rather than larger amounts of wool. So I'm going to keep doing this until I've probably got enough of my white spots all over the mushroom. So I'll be back in a second once all this has been added. Right, so I've added the spots to my mushroom. The next thing to do is flip it over and we're going to focus on the inside of our mushroom.